What if Neville Longbottom was the chosen one? What if the Potters had been tortured into insanity and the Longbottoms were betrayed and murdered? What if a child that no one thought of having extraordinary magical talent was the key to stopping the Dark Lord? Follow along on this magical Harry Potter What If as we discover what would happen if the roles were reversed and clumsy. Neville Longbottom was the chosen one. News traveled through the wizarding world like wildfire. He who must not be named, Voldemort, was dead. Everyone was in celebration. For the first time in a while, the streets of the wizarding world were filled. Witches and wizards no longer had to cower in their homes in fear of Death Eaters attacking them on the street. Things could go back to how they had always been. Members of the Order of the Phoenix, an organization that had taken special care to ensure Voldemort would be destroyed, could finally come out of hiding and go back to their normal lives. But they were also the only ones that took this new day of victory with a grain of salt. Not everyone had reason to celebrate today. The boy who lived, Neville Longbottom, only a year old and hero of the wizarding world, destroyed the Dark Lord and survived the killing curse. But at what expense? Neville survived and would forever be a hero to all. But his parents died in the attack. Frank and Alice Longbottom had learned from Dumbledore soon after the birth of their son that Neville was prophesied to be the one with the power to destroy the Dark Lord. In order to protect him, they had gone into hiding with the use of the Fidelius charm. Only a select few within the Order knew where they were hiding, thus keeping them safe from Voldemort finding them. So, on that ill-fated night when Voldemort found their home, it was a miracle that Neville was still alive. Those within the Order were certain that there was someone on the inside that passed information to Voldemort. It was the only explanation to how he found the Longbottoms. Neville was taken to his grandmother's house where Dumbledore explained the situation. Augusta Longbottom was to raise her grandson, that she was the only option to raise the boy, and that Frank and Alice had died as heroes for the wizarding world. Augusta was distraught at the thought that her only son had been murdered because of some prophecy that declared this infant a hero and a savior to the wizarding world. She wanted nothing to do with it. She would raise Neville, but as he grew older, she only told him that his parents had been killed in the war. She refused to go into detail about the circumstances, which Neville was respectful of. Though he wanted to know more, he understood that it was a traumatizing event that his grandmother didn't want to relive, so he didn't push it. After the war, the Ministry had taken to hunting down Death Eaters and those who had aided Voldemort during his rise. However, many managed to avoid capture, claiming that they were forced by the Imperious Curse or by keeping themselves well hidden when the Ministry came searching. 4 particular Death Eaters that evaded imprisonment were on the search of where Voldemort had disappeared to. They knew that it was impossible for him to be gone completely, and knew that their best chances of finding the Dark Lord was through the Order members that had worked so hard to get rid of him. Lily and James Potter, who had been especially involved with keeping Frank and Alice's home hidden, would be the place to start on finding Voldemort. James Potter was the first to be taken on his way home from work. He found himself in a place that was unfamiliar to him. However, he was well aware of who the 4 Death Eaters were, all loyal followers to Voldemort. Bellatrix Lestrange, Rodolphus Lestrange, Rabastan Lestrange, and Bartemius Crouch Jr. With the use of the Cruciatus Curse, the 4 Death Eaters questioned and tortured James Potter in search of where Voldemort was hiding. Despite James's claims of not knowing where he was, that he believed he was dead, the 4 continued to torture the man. His claims were not believed as the Potters had been the other family mentioned in the prophecy, and any information they had could lead them back to Voldemort. The torture continued until James Potter no longer made any sense. The Cruciatus Curse took its toll and left James depleted and exhausted both physically and mentally. He was no longer useful to the Death Eaters. In response, Lily Potter was kidnapped and forced to endure the same torture. Her cries and claims of not knowing anything went unanswered. The Death Eaters were unrelenting and did not stop until Lily Potter was left in the same mess of a person as her husband was. The torture of the Potters did lead to the eventual capture of the 4 Death Eaters. After being tried in front of the Wizengamot, the four were sent to Azkaban, including Barty Crouch Jr., who was sentenced and disowned by his own father. The Potters were taken to St. Mungo's, where the healers could not do anything to help them except take away any pain they were facing. The constant torture that they had been through, and at such great length, left the couple with permanent brain damage. James and Lily Potter were no longer able to care for themselves or their son Harry. They were placed in the care of St. Mungo's permanent ward to be cared for, and this left Harry to be raised by Sirius Black, his godfather, with the help of Remus Lupin. Sirius had been overjoyed when James and Lily had named him Harry's godfather, but he hadn't imagined that he would actually have to raise the boy. He had imagined being the cool uncle that Harry would always want to spend time with. And now 2 of his best friends were deemed insane, and his third was missing and presumed dead. It was just him and Remus now. When Neville got his letter to Hogwarts, he was excited to get some time outside of the house and make some friends, as his grandmother didn't take him anywhere often. He was mostly left to himself. But he was also nervous. His family had been certain for a while that he didn't have any magical ability. A few thought he may even be a squib. So how could he go to Hogwarts when he could barely do magic? However, when his grandmother saw the letter, she declared that he would not be going and that he would be homeschooled with her. This was a great disappointment to Neville. A few days after tossing the letter into the trash as he wasn't going to school, there was a knock at the door. A very large man, at least 10 feet tall, stood at the door. He had to crouch to let himself into the house and stayed that way until he helped himself to the couch. "Who are you, sir?" Neville asked quietly. "My grandmother is out in the garden. I can go get her." "Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts." The man introduced himself. "We have not received your letter about attending school." "I'm sorry, sir. My grandmother says that she will homeschool me." Neville shook his head. "Homeschool?" Hagrid laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. Someone like you can't be homeschooled." "Someone like me?" "Neville, who are you talking to?" His grandmother came into the room, surprised at the sight of Hagrid on her couch. "Neville here says that he's being homeschooled," Hagrid explained. "I don't think that's what his parents would have wanted. His parents died because of that man. I don't want him anywhere near it. He'll stay here, where he's not involved." Augustus said firmly. "You know who is gone? Neville will be in no danger." "Neville, up to your room," his grandmother ordered. It took Hagrid a bit of time to convince Augusta that Neville needed to be at Hogwarts, that there was no place safer for him, and that he would be able to build his magic carefully. Though Neville wasn't sure why that conversation had to take place without him in the room. He knew his parents had died in the war, and he knew that his gran was still afraid. It wasn't until Hagrid took Neville to get his school supplies that he learned about what really happened. After some questions about what he and his grandmother had been talking about, Hagrid had revealed to him that he had been the reason that the Dark Lord was defeated 10 years ago. He was the boy who survived the killing curse, and that his parents had died in order to protect him. His grandmother had never said any of that, and it explained why every single person on the street was looking at him as he shopped for his school supplies. Everyone had known that he had defeated Voldemort. Everyone except him. When Sirius and Remus took Harry to get his school supplies, he was excited and hyper, ready to visit every store and buy anything that the two would let him. He couldn't believe he was about to start school soon, but he was nervous. Harry worried about how many people would know what happened to his parents. It wasn't something that he wanted to talk about with anyone. He missed his parents every day and wished that they were a part of his life, but he didn't want the whole school to know what had happened. There were a lot of whispers as they walked through Diagon Alley, and Harry wasn't sure what was going on until he saw everyone looking at a boy as he passed. He looked to be about Harry's age, and he was with someone taller than he had ever seen before. "Who is that?" Harry questioned as they walked into Flourish and Blotts. "Neville Longbottom?" Remus patted Harry's back. "You remember we told you about him? He's the one that killed Voldemort, right?" Harry nodded. "That's right," Sirius nodded. I forgot he's your age. You guys will be at Hogwarts together. We'll go see Mom and Dad one more time before I go to school, right? Of course, and we'll visit for each break too. Sirius gave him a soft smile. Don't worry. September 1st had arrived, and it was nearly time for the train to leave. 10:56. Neville walked alongside his grandmother, dragging a trunk that was the size of him behind him. He struggled to load it onto the train as his grandmother did not have the strength to help him. Augusta placed her hand on his cheek and warned him to be good and be careful before shooing him onto the train so he would not miss it accidentally. Neville walked along the train until he found a compartment that didn't have anyone else sitting inside of it. He wasn't looking to become a spectacle before even arriving at Hogwarts. He knew he wouldn't be able to keep to himself for long. As soon as his name was called at the sorting ceremony, the whole school would know that he was there. Sirius had already helped Harry load his trunk onto the train, and they were now saying their goodbyes on the platform. Is Remus going to be okay? Harry questioned, worried that he wasn't there to see him off. He's fine, Harry. Don't you worry. He's just not feeling too great after last night. Remember, that's a secret, all right? Sirius winked. Are you ready? Harry hugged his godfather as tight as he could. Thank you. I'll write as soon as I get sorted. Be safe and have a good time. Sirius returned the hug. We'll see you at Christmas. Now get on that train before you miss it. Harry walked through the train. He was one of the last to get on board, so there weren't any seats left, not that he had found yet. He was nearly to the back of the train when he found a compartment with only 2 other boys in it, one of which was Neville Longbottom, the boy he saw in Diagon Alley a few weeks before. The other was a redhead that looked to be the same age as him. He slid open the compartment door before asking if he could join the two. Ron Weasley, and this is Neville. The redhead introduced himself and the other boy. Are you a first year too? Yeah, I'm Harry Potter. He took a seat beside the boy. I was just about to show Neville this spell my brother showed me. Ron pulled his wand from his pocket, motioning to the rat on his lap. This is Scabbers, Sunshine Daisies. Bottom Mellow, turn this stupid fat rat yellow. When Ron pointed his wand at the pet, nothing happened except a loud squeak came from the rat as he crawled from the boy's lap. Tough luck, Harry chuckled. Maybe after some practice in charms, we can turn him yellow. Have you guys tried any magic yet? He tucked his wand back into his shirt. No. My gran didn't want me to make the couch disappear by mistake. I'm awfully clumsy. Neville shook his head. The closest I've gotten is flying. Harry agreed with Neville. I've been shown a few things, but nothing that they've let me try on my own. But I really want to play Quidditch next year, so I've been practicing flying. There was a loud croak that suddenly caught their attention, before a toad leaped from the seat and into the hall. Shoot! Neville was quick to get to his feet. Sorry, that's my toad, I'll be right back. He stepped out to catch the pet, only for it to hop away down the hall. You know who that is, right? Ron whispered once Neville was out of earshot. Neville Longbottom. He killed you-know-who when he was just a baby. I think everyone knows who he is, Harry nodded. Though I'm sure he's tired of everyone treating him like he's famous, I would be. He said he's being raised by his grandma. I don't know what I'd do without my parents. My family may be annoying, but I'd hate to be raised by any of my extended family. Ron nodded in agreement. You think he'll be in Gryffindor? Both his parents were. I hope to be in Gryffindor too. Both my parents and all of my brothers were. All your brothers? How many do you have? Harry questioned. 5 older brothers and 1 younger sister. Wow, I'm an only child, Harry laughed. The compartment door suddenly slid open. Is Neville here? A girl questioned. I found his toad. He went looking for it, but he was sitting in here with us. I can hold on to it for him, Harry offered. Neville Longbottom, the chosen one, right? She questioned. You guys have been sitting with him. Yeah, we don't really know him yet. We've hardly been on the train for an hour. Ron shrugged. News spread through the train quickly that Neville Longbottom, the boy who lived, was now on his way to Hogwarts. As the students were waiting for the sorting ceremony to start, someone made sure to point that out to everyone. "So the rumor is true then," a blond boy stepped forward. "Neville Longbottom has come to Hogwarts." The students started whispering as the boy stepped over to where Neville was standing with Ron and Harry. "I'm Malfoy, Draco Malfoy." He introduced himself, extending a hand. "You don't want to be making friends with the wrong sort? I can help you there." It was clear that his opinion was directed at Ron, staring at him the entire time he spoke. Neville stood still, confused on what was going on, only for Harry to speak first. "The wrong sort seems like someone that puts down others they don't even know." Draco retracted his hand, just as Professor McGonagall came to retrieve the new students. Neville was lucky enough to be sorted into Gryffindor, though the sorting hat did talk a bit about the possibility of Slytherin. Ron and Harry were both sorted into Gryffindor as well, which gave him a lot of relief. Harry hadn't asked him anything about him being the chosen one, and Ron, outside of when they first met, didn't seem to care either. After the sorting, Draco had made it his mission to make Neville his personal punching bag. Though it wasn't difficult, Neville did not seem to be a very student. He couldn't master basic spells in class. His first potion blew up in his face, and his very first flying lesson sent him to the hospital wing when he lost control of his broom and broke his wrist. He couldn't help but wonder why he was the chosen one when it seemed like he had no skill to back it up. He was thankful to have friends like Harry and Ron who stood up for him at each opportunity. Harry broke the rules in order to get his Remembrall back from Draco after he broke his wrist. Neville was relieved to hear that he didn't get into any trouble for breaking the rules. In fact, it was the opposite. Professor McGonagall had given him a position on the Quidditch team because of his flying skills. When he was finally released from the hospital wing, it was late at night, and when he got up to the entrance of the Gryffindor common room, he realized that he didn't remember what the current password was. So he sat and waited for anyone to come by to let him in, but it was the middle of the night. It was unlikely that anyone would be coming by soon. After about an hour of sitting there, the portrait opened. Ron and Harry came out, Hermione following them and telling them that they were breaking the rules. "Neville, what are you doing out here?" Ron questioned. "I forgot the password," he sighed. "What are you guys doing out so late?" "Draco challenged us to a duel," Harry explained. "The password is Pig Snout, but it looks like the fat lady went for a walk." He pointed to the empty frame. Hermione and Neville resigned themselves to following Ron and Harry rather than being stuck outside the common room. Only when the four got to the trophy room, Draco was nowhere to be seen. The three had almost been caught by Filch when they hid in the third-floor corridor. They had lost the caretaker, but instead found something far more terrifying: a three-headed dog. It filled the room from floor to ceiling. One paw could have crushed two of them at once. The four students didn't hesitate to run, slamming the door behind them and moving as fast as they could back to the common room. They speculated for some time as to why a creature like that would be kept at the school. Things didn't start to make sense until Halloween, when a troll had somehow made its way into the dungeons of the school. Everyone had been instructed back to their dormitories. Only Hermione had overheard that Draco had locked Neville in one of the broom cupboards in the basement. She quickly grabbed Ron and Harry, knowing that they would be able to help him even if they didn't like her very much. "Thank you," Neville spoke, embarrassed of what had just happened. "I never would have been able to take on the troll alone." Hermione took the fall for the four being in the dungeons. Neville and Harry noticed blood on Snape's leg as they were being reprimanded. It was only plausible that he tried to get past the three-headed dog. And it was only a week later that a rogue bludger nearly took Neville's head off during Harry's first Quidditch game. Hermione had seen Snape muttering some sort of curse. With Harry's help, while everyone in the stands took cover, Harry flew his broom close enough to where the teachers that knocked them all off their feet. With the jinx no longer in effect, the bludger returned to normal, returning to the Quidditch pitch. Hagrid had accidentally let a few details slip when questioned about the three-headed dog. Fluffy, as he called it, was protecting something. something that had to do with a man named Nicholas Flamel. The four had decided that with the Christmas holiday just around the corner, they would begin their search for Nicholas Flamel would begin at the start of the new term. Hermione had a perfectly normal Christmas with her parents, presents, and a large meal, just what everyone would expect of a holiday with family. Ron's time was also perfectly expected, though a bit more chaotic compared to Hermione's time off from school. Bill and Charlie surprised the family by coming home for Christmas. With 7 kids all trying to talk and open presents at the same time, this left no room for everyone to be heard, and the family exhausted by the end of the evening. When Neville got home, the house felt a bit empty, despite all of the family that his grandmother invited over to the house. Everyone wanted to know how Neville was doing in school, but not for the reasons of learning what Neville was enjoying or if he had any friends. Everyone had expected for some time that he didn't even have magic, if it weren't for the fact that he was the chosen one. They wanted to know if he had gotten any better with his magic. Neville opted to talk about what he was learning rather than how he was doing. He didn't want to empower their teasing or blunt comments about how terrible of a wizard he was, while they continued to question how someone like him could have defeated Voldemort. Harry's time was spent with mixed emotions. He was so excited to be home to see Remus and Sirius. He knew the two would have plenty of fun things for them to do over the 2-week break. And Sirius always spoiled Harry, making sure he had amazing presents that he knew the boy would love, and Remus would always take him to Diagon Alley so that he could pick out a gift to get his parents before the visit. This year, he saw a bouquet of flowers that immediately made him think of his mother. Pink lilies with white and red roses. The visits were always hard for Harry. He loved seeing his parents, and he loved when he saw the glimmer of recognition in their eyes, but he couldn't have a real conversation with them, and it was rare that they would do anything that showed him that they knew who he was. But at least they were alive. He couldn't imagine being in Neville's shoes. "I don't know, guys," Neville spoke as they sat at the library table. "Maybe we should give up on this." It had been 3 days of searching the library, and they still hadn't found anything about Nicholas Flamel. "We can't, we're so close," Hermione shook her head. "I don't see how you care so little." Ron wasn't looking at any books. He was sorting through his chocolate frog cards. "Snape's almost killed you twice now. It just doesn't seem like something we should be looking into." Neville shrugged. "I'm sure whatever the dog is protecting, Dumbledore is going to take good care of it." "We haven't checked the restricted section yet," Harry suggested. "I could sneak down here tonight and see if there's anything about Flamel." He saw the confusion on the others' faces. "I got something for Christmas this year that will help us sneak around. I can show you when we get back up to the dormitory." Harry used his new invisibility cloak, a gift from Sirius and Remus that was his father's, to get down to the restricted section with ease. He assured the others that it would be best if he went down alone the first time, so that they could not accidentally get caught by talking or someone falling out from under the cloak. And it was good he did. He was nearly caught by Filch in the library, and then again when he nearly ran into Snape and Quirrell. He managed to slip away into an empty classroom. Inside was a mirror. It stood tall, almost to the ceiling. It was in an old, detailed frame, with strange writing across the top of it. And when Harry stood in front of the mirror, he saw the most magical thing. He stood there, with his parents on either side of them. And although they couldn't speak, and he knew they weren't really standing there, he knew that the reflection was his real parents. It was who they should have been had they not been tortured into insanity. Behind them was Remus and Sirius. Harry saw his family whole and normal, the family he wished he had. The next night, he brought Ron and Neville to see the mirror, curious to see if they would see his parents as well, or if their view in the mirror would be different. Ron went first. He saw himself with Dumbledore. Gryffindor had won the House Cup. Ron was head boy and Quidditch captain. Neville saw something similar to Harry. His parents were standing with him, alive and well. The 3 of them together, as Neville had always hoped for. They didn't understand why they all saw something different, or why Ron's was a more extreme difference from the other 2. Harry and Neville found themselves going back to the mirror without Ron the next night before curfew. "I'm sorry about your parents." Harry interrupted the silence while Neville was taking his turn in front of the mirror. "You live with your grandmother, right?" "Yeah, she takes care of me. None of my family thinks that I'm very good at magic. Some think that me being the chosen one was a mistake. Not that they say that to my face." Neville shrugged. "I never knew much about them, other than they died trying to protect me. My gran didn't even tell me how they died until I started school this year. She just said they died in the war." Neville paused for a moment, looking up from the mirror. "Why do you see your parents?" "After the war ended, a couple of Death Eaters were trying to find where Voldemort had gone. They thought that my parents knew where to find him. They kidnapped and tortured them. They were tortured for so long that they lost their minds. They're at St. Mungo's permanent ward since they can't take care of themselves anymore." Harry's voice was low. "I've never told anyone that. I live with my godfather and another friend of my parents. They've taken care of me since then." "I'm sorry." Neville nodded. "I didn't know. No one cared what happened after they found out that Voldemort was dead. It didn't matter who died in the process, or that it took so many to get there. All that mattered was that they were safe now. I know our situation wasn't quite the same, but if you ever need to talk." Harry nodded. "Thanks, Harry." Neville pulled himself to his feet. "But I don't think it'll do us any good just sitting here wishing things were different. Let's go to bed." Hermione came down to breakfast the next morning with a book she had gotten from the library. Excited to realize that she had read about Nicholas Flamel weeks ago when she checked out the book. Nicholas Flamel, the famous alchemist, was the inventor of the Sorcerer's Stone, which could create the elixir of life. Thanks to the stone, Flamel had recently celebrated 665th birthday. It was easy to deduce that Fluffy was guarding the stone and that Snape must be trying to steal the stone for himself. The four quickly went to Hagrid's to question him about the stone, who assured them that it was quite safe and was able to rebut any argument they had about Snape trying to take the stone for himself. The conversation was quickly moved elsewhere when a rattling noise came from his fireplace. He pulled out a large egg from the pot over the fire, and within moments a dragon was freshly hatched on the kitchen table. A Norwegian ridgeback, according to Ron. Hagrid had gotten one from a stranger he met at the Three Broomsticks. He had always wanted a dragon. Norbert, as Hagrid had decided to call him, grew quickly, and within a week and a half, it was clear that the small hut was too small to keep the dragon contained in. It was clear that the dragon had to go when he bit Ron, sending him to the hospital wing. Ron had managed to contact his brother in Romania. The sanctuary would be able to take the dragon, with the help of some of Charlie's friends that would be able to pick up the dragon and take him out to the sanctuary. The hard part would be moving the dragon to a place where they could easily fly in without being seen. Hermione and Harry assured Ron and Neville that they would take care of it, as Neville was too nervous of getting caught, and Ron was still recovering in the hospital wing. The only problem was that Neville overheard Draco saying that he was going to follow them and try to get them in trouble. So Neville snuck out after Harry and Hermione to try to warn them. Harry, Hermione, Draco, and Neville all found themselves in Professor McGonagall's private office. She took 50 points from each of them, dropping Gryffindor 150 points, and said they would each be serving detention due to them sneaking out after curfew. As upset as they were for how many points they had lost, but it was quite lucky that no one had seen the dragon that Harry and Hermione had just gotten rid of. Detention wasn't for another 2 weeks. The Gryffindors thought that they were safe from a terrible night when they realized they would be serving their detention with Hagrid. Only that quickly changed when they learned that he would be taking them into the Forbidden Forest, in search of something that was hunting the unicorns. Malfoy, Neville, and Fang went one way, while Harry, Hermione, and Hagrid went the other way. Neville couldn't stop shaking. He couldn't understand why students were forced to walk through such a dangerous part of the woods unsupervised. What if something happened to them? And Draco's relentless taunting of him wasn't helping. He knew he wasn't the best wizard, and so if anything were to happen, he wouldn't be much help. And it was time to put that to the test when they came across a cloaked figure, leaning over a recently killed unicorn. The figure stood and immediately began approaching the boys. The two both screamed and tried to run off in the direction that they knew Hagrid was. Only Neville tripped over a branch and crashed to the ground. The figure continued to creep towards him, his scar burning the closer that it got, until a large beast jumped over him and scared of the figure. A centaur who stood protectively in front of Neville until he was sure that the figure was gone. After ensuring that Neville was safe, he warned him to be careful, that terrible things were about to happen, and that there would be an attempt on the hidden object within Hogwarts. Only one would sacrifice their soul by drinking the blood of a unicorn, and who would need the stone more than anyone else. Centaurs were known for being vague in their predictions, but it was clear that he was talking of Voldemort. It made sense. Snape was trying to get the stone to Voldemort to bring him back. When hearing of this, Ron, Harry, and Hermione were quick to realize that they had to talk to Dumbledore. That would be able to stop any plot that was about to happen. Only when they attempted to find the headmaster, he was not at the school. He had been called to the ministry. Ron and Harry began making plans on how to get past the dog in order to beat Voldemort to the stone. But Neville wasn't so sure. Even after they had learned from Hagrid that Fluffy would go to sleep at the sound of music. Neville? Harry pulled him to the side as they readied to sneak into the third-floor corridor. I'm not going to make you do this with us, but if Voldemort gets to stone first, then what happens to my parents, our parents, would be for nothing. I'm not going to sit here and let him come back to power while my parents sit at St. Mungo's with almost no memory of me. I'm not brave like you, Harry. Neville shook his head. I don't know why I'm the chosen one. I don't know why Voldemort would have chosen me over you. It could have been either of us, but I'm not brave. I'm not a good wizard. You're braver and stronger than you know. Harry disagreed. You snuck out to try and save us from detention. You trusted me with the story about your parents. The Sorting Hat put you in Gryffindor for a reason. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had just stepped out into the corridor when Neville decided to go with them. Fluffy was already asleep due to a harp that was playing itself in the corner of the room. They jumped through the trapdoor just as the music stopped and the dog began to wake. Only they landed in a weird vine-like plant. Devil's Snare, it was quick to attack the students, wrapping them in the vines the more they struggled. If it weren't for Neville's love of herbology and Hermione reading ahead in the textbooks, they were able to use light to scare off the plant and keep it from killing them. When they walked into the next room, rather than finding the stone, they found a room filled with keys, flying up above them, and a broom on a pedestal. Ron was quick to point out that one must fit the lock into the next room, describing what it could possibly look like based on the way the door was carved. Harry took the broom, knowing he was the best flyer among them. When he touched the broom, all of the keys turned towards him and began to swarm, making the search for the key he needed much more difficult. It was lucky that he was a seeker, otherwise it would make it nearly impossible for him to grab the key he needed. He had to toss the key down to the others in order for them to open the door while he still tried to lose the keys that were chasing him. Once the door was open, he slid into the room and the other three slammed the door behind him, preventing any of the keys from following them into the next chamber. Only Harry didn't have space for a proper landing. He tumbled to the ground and he felt something snap when he did. His leg was broken and he wouldn't be able to help in the next room, which was a large chessboard they would have to play across the room. Ron, who was a great chess player, took charge of this one, appointing himself as the knight, Neville as a bishop, and Hermione as a rook. Harry was able to figure out what he was up to, which was lucky, because Neville and Hermione would not have been able to finish the match after he sacrificed himself. After the Queen took out Ron's knight, Harry directed Neville to checkmate the king. With the game over, he hobbled his way over to Ron's side, telling the other two to continue one while he waited here with Ron. The next room would be the easiest, as a large troll lay in the room, motionless. It was clear that it was meant to attack them, but someone had already taken care of it. The moment they stepped into the next room, the entrance from which they just came had been blocked by purple flames, and the path ahead was blocked by black flames. A single table sat in the middle of the room with 7 potion bottles and a piece of parchment paper. Hermione was quick to take over this puzzle. She read through the riddle twice before looking over the potions, and then once more to ensure that she was going to pick the correct one. The blue bottle would allow them to pass through to the next room, while the purple potion would allow them to travel back to the chess room. The only problem was that there was only enough of the blue potion for one to slip through the black flames. As much as it pained Neville to admit, he knew that he had to be the one to go on. He was, as everyone liked to remind him, the chosen one. He didn't know how he was supposed to take on Snape alone, but if only one could go through, that meant that Hermione could go back and get help. He told her to do just that, to get Harry and Ron to the hospital wing and find Dumbledore or McGonagall. He would hopefully be able to stall long enough for someone to come down and help him. He calmed his nerves just enough to drink the blue potion and stepped into the next room. In the center, down a few steps, was the mirror that he and Harry had visited so many times to catch a glimpse of their parents. Standing in front of it was not Professor Snape as they had suspected. Rather, it was Professor Quirrell. He did not seem surprised to see Neville standing in the room with him, nor was he surprised that the students suspected the other teacher. After all, he put up a rather convincing act of being a nervous wreck of a teacher all year. After telling the boy to share with what he saw in the mirror, this was different from the last time he stood in front of the mirror. Instead of the image of his parents behind him, he saw himself standing alone. The reflection reached into its pocket and pulled out a red stone that seemed to glow. He had the stone in his own pocket at that moment. Neville quickly lied to Quirrell, claiming that he saw himself with the house cup and Dumbledore congratulating him, borrowing the image that Ron had seen when he looked in the mirror. When the lie was quickly spotted, Quirrell removed his turban that sat upon his head. Growing out of the back of his head, like a parasite, was another face. Neville's scar burned the worst it had all year, and as soon as he saw the face, he knew exactly who that was. Voldemort. Neville tried to run when he was commanded to hand over the stone, only for Quirrell to attack him. He fell back the steps, Quirrell's hand around his throat and the stone tumbling from his pocket. Neville reached for the rock, but it was just out of his grasp. His hand wrapped around the wrists of the professor, trying to force him off of him, when the professor began screaming. He jumped back, his hand in the air as he stared at it. The skin had gone gray and began cracking and crumbling, as if turning to ash. Neville hadn't a clue what he had done to cause this, but it had started where he had touched the man. So he quickly moved forward, placing both of his hands on his face. Quirrell stumbled back, his screams growing louder as the same effect began to turn his face into gray stone. One last attempt to come towards the boy ended short as he began to crumble away into nothing. Neville let out a sigh of relief as he reached for the stone, but when he stood straight, he saw what looked like a ghost of a person. No real form, but it came towards him, and everything went dark. When Neville woke, he found that he was in the hospital wing. Ron and Harry were being discharged by Madame Pomfrey, and Professor Dumbledore had just come into the room to check on the boys. Neville? Harry rushed over to his side, on his feet and his leg back to full strength thanks to Pomfrey. You did it. I told you that you were plenty brave. He gave his friend a pat on the back. You're both okay? He questioned, trying to sit himself up on the bed. We're both fine, Ron nodded. Ron, Harry, Dumbledore spoke calmly, approaching the bed as well. If it's quite all right, I'd like to speak with Neville alone. We'll see you in a bit. Harry nodded, the two of them heading towards the exit. Professor, Neville quickly spoke. The stone, what happened? It is safe, my boy, thanks to you. Dumbledore took a seat on the side of the bed. I have talked with my friend Nicholas Flamel, and we've decided that it would be best that the stone be destroyed. Before Neville could say anything, Dumbledore continued. I must thank you, Neville. I knew the stone was in danger, but I did not know that Voldemort was right under my nose. He's gone now, right? I'm afraid that there are other ways he could potentially come back, but this was the easiest, and that option is now gone for him. Had you not been the one to go down there, it is likely that he would have succeeded. When I touched Professor Quirrell, something happened, Professor. Neville couldn't think of how to explain it. Yes, my boy. Dumbledore nodded. That night, all those years ago when Voldemort tried to kill you, the spell rebounded because of your mother's sacrifice. Voldemort cannot touch you because your mother continues to protect you. Dumbledore patted the boy's shoulder lightly. I will allow you to get some rest. Thank you, Neville. What would happen if Voldemort had chosen Neville as the threat to his reign? How would Neville react differently to being the chosen one? How would this change the events of the war and Voldemort's reclaim to power? The world of Harry Potter is filled with many magical, untold stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see what magical journey we take next.